Hello, this is Manny Straley. Hopefully you all can hear me. We're going to begin the webinar, and thank you for all attending. And if you have any comments or questions at any point, please put them into the chat box in the webinar. I'm sharing my screen now. Hopefully you could all see it and hear me. If you can't, please let me know via the chat box. I have muted all of you at the moment. So we're going to begin this. This is somewhat of a deceptive title because we are going to share some ways where you can make money in certification, but the deception is around how you can make money without using the traditional fees. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about us, and then we're going to talk about why did I come up with today's webinar for someone who sits more on the technical side of the fence in the certification industry, usually in psychometrics and exam development. Then we're going to talk about those traditional fees, and then there's some traditional fees that are less common, but they're still traditional. And then we're going to talk about the ways you can make money outside those traditional fees, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then what will you do next as you're going through this webinar? How can you think of ways that you could implement some of the things we're suggesting? And hopefully we could also hear from you and what any ideas you may have for this group, so we could compile a list of more things to think about. And then we're going to talk about our upcoming webinars and talking events that we have coming up. And then any remaining questions that you all have. So a little bit about us. We were founded about 5 years ago. We are in the DC area, although we're getting ready to move to Savannah in 2020. I'm the only owner, I'm the founder and the only owner of AIR. We have about 16 individuals. We are expanding our sales force, so that will probably go up to about 19, 20 individuals next year. We're very proud to say that we're relatively small. We're agile and flexible. We do have, in many ways, the larger organizations tend to have a large group, obviously, but they tend to have less or about the same PhD level psychometricians on staff as we do. And then we also have accreditation experience with NCCA and ANSI. I'm an ANSI assessor for 17024. And then we also have some of colleagues from the industry and other psychometricians and some folks from the business world, not even associated with the assessment world, on our senior advisory council. They just help us with ways we get stuck or any suggestions for the business itself. And then our experience and expertise is really primarily in exam development and psychometrics and accreditation. That's where we place most of our emphasis and most of our work. We've consulted a number of organizations in our own experience portfolio, over 100. I've probably conducted about 100 to over 150 job analysis standard settings and item writing workshops in my experience. I've been around this field for about 20 years. I was formerly a certification manager. This is a little bit about me. That's why I'm interested in how we can make money in certification outside those traditional fees. I do have a PhD in educational psychology with an emphasis in measurement. I did get my, I came close to getting a second PhD in counseling psychology. That's how it all began. And I'm one of the few psychometricians that began their career in clinical assessments and psychometrics as an undergrad. I wanted to be a therapist, so I did get a social therapy certification. I hold 2 certifications, one in social therapy and one in information security. And then I actually had a third one technically in data management support, which is also IT driven. So I have a mix of a lot of different experiences and training and things like that. I've worked for a number of testing organizations, PMI, National Board of Medical Examiners, Prometric. And then I founded ICA in the past, and I founded this organization. So I've done a lot of things in this area. What I like to do for fun is actually make pizzas and go to presidential libraries and museum parts. I've been to 11 of them, and I also like to spend time with family and friends when I have downtime as well. So let's talk about this webinar. So I got inspired from this webinar from Paul Jarvis's book, A Company of One. It's probably my favorite business book because it just embraces, probably if someone said, what should I do when I grow up? I should be a business owner. I love business. My parents had their own real estate sort of business on the side, and my mom had her own business on the herself. Being in leather and fur altercations, and then my father was a director in a large automotive company, and so there was a lot of things that I sort of picked up over the years from them doing business and learning how to do a business and things like that. And I really wanted to stay away from that when I was younger, but I realized I love being a small business owner and actually influencing the field and really trying to do a great job and meeting expectations for our clients. So this Company of One, the one thing it said was you should always help the companies you consult out with beyond just your technical or whatever services you're providing, and always try to help them make money. So I said, well, how can I help organizations in certification, credentialing, licensure, whatever you call the credential, how can I make them money? So this is what inspired this, and it's an incredible book. It's good for a large company. If you're a part of a large company too, you sort of set up goals and things like that that are realistic, and it's just a way of life rather than trying to come up with like an empire for yourself. So let's talk about what actually happens and how we sort of make money in credentialing in general. We have essentially three types of fees that we collect. When I was the manager at GBCI, we always had an application fee, we had an exam registration fee, and we had a recertification fee. And sometimes these are lumped together, and sometimes there's different ways of looking at these things. But your application fee, they're going to apply for your certification. Then they have to register, so that might be another fee. And then renewal or recertification or maintenance of competency fees, those are also associated. And then there's all the fees associated with them, which is the late fees, the rescheduling, any discounted, lumped, bulked membership, and then there's those administrative fees like bounce checks, submission by fax, and that we cover a little in the next slide. But this is typically how we collect all our fees. This is an example from the Board of Certification in Professional Ergonomics. You can see there's an application fee, there's examination fee, and then that's somewhat like a registration fee, and then there's a certification renewal fee. They have all these other fees that are associated, the rescheduling, the retake, the late. So there's the other fees that you could associate with these traditional fees. And here's the less common fees that you have. Accounting fees, those are the bounce checks sort of things. Administration fees, you can sort of charge someone if they have 2 certifications or they want to send something snail mail or fax. You can start charging that. There's hand scoring or score reporting requests that are just more than one. Maybe you want to send your scores to other organizations, and you could charge for that. Some groups do translated exam fees because the exam's now translated. It costs a lot of money. There's second chance insurance or retake sort of fees. Second chance insurance is a unique way that HRCI does that. And then rescheduling and extensions. So these are still within the traditional parts of payments and collecting your fees from your credential holders. And that's how we sort of make money in certification on traditional methods. So how do we make money in certification with the less traditional fees, those application, registration, and recertification fees? So there's essentially about 5, 6, 7 ways that I outlined here. There's online stores, merchandise, exam preparation. Frame certifications can fall within merchandise, but it goes beyond that. And then there's content like body and knowledge studies or papers or reports. And there's sponsorships and events, and they can go hand in hand. So let's break this down into a few areas. So your merchandise or online store. This is an example. So you could sell anything. You could do wearables, drinkware, clothing, pins. That's very common. This is ONCC's example. They charge $34 for a pin. Just imagine if you have 100 takers in a year. That's a little bit of revenue there. It's not a chump change anymore. If you have 1,000, it gets bigger. So, and they might buy more than one pin, so that's another thing to consider. So there's a reason that this has existed for a while there on ONCC's website. Now, I'm not sure if Bill Ellis is on the call, but he brought this to my attention that more organizations should be doing this, and they have their online store. And they sell, these are an example of, I think they sell 4 or 5 things, but this is an example of 2 things that they sell. And it's not the cheapest thing, but at the same time, I have a credential, the GISF, which is information security, and maybe I would want one of these on my desk. And it could be a really nice gift for the holiday season that's coming up as well. So these are some ideas for you to consider. Now, when you're considering it, each of these areas that I'm going to talk about the pros and cons. They're going to be very similar. So the pros is that there's a revenue source. Whether or not you make a profit, that's something else. But for the most part, the folks that I've talked to, and this is how I learned about this, is by talking to my colleagues in the industry, is that they do make some money off of this. They make a profit from it. It does help your marketing to another channel, and if you integrate it, it creates the buzz, so more and more people might be interested in getting those things after they earn the certification. And it just brings value to your credential holders. A little extrinsic value, but it's value, and then it's something that they could ask for, I guess, for the holidays, or some gift in the future. Cons, there's some setup costs, setup administrative implementation things you have to consider. Are you going to consider a third party for this, or are you going to have your technology people do it? Then there's the payment systems in your organization. So there's, it's another product that you're selling, just like your certification is a product. So you have to think of all these pieces. How are you going to maintain it? The labor involved. How are you going to get the approval to do this? Who's really collecting the money? Is it the marketing team now, or merchandise collecting it? Or is it really the certification department collecting it? So there's all these little things that you have to think about. But at the end of the day, you're still making a profit. Well, hopefully you're making a profit, but you're bringing in revenue. So consider that online store. The next thing is very obvious. A lot of groups do this, but sometimes you don't think about it. And sometimes the obvious things are the things that really are not obvious to a lot of folks. So exam preparation, these are the most common things you could think about: the practice exam, the courses or training. The diagnostic tests are less common, but you could have a little diagnostic test, and then you could recommend reference materials. We help organizations do that in that way, in that manner. So this is what's really astonishing. The 10 biggest exam preparation organizations made this last year. So that's close to $500 million in revenue. So wouldn't it be great to get just 1 million from that as your organization? Especially if you're larger, you have a greater chance of capturing that exam preparation dollar sign. So it's something not to dismiss at all. Here's some examples. This is the American Study of Safety Professionals. They have their exam preparation courses. Some of you already have this. Some of you may not have it. Sometimes it's exam prep. ONCC, this is an example of their practice tests, and they charge a certain fee. And This is a 50 item. It has correct answer, reference, and rationale. So they go a little beyond some of the groups, but when you do it internally, you could actually make it more valuable for your candidates and your future customers. So what's some of the pros? Again, very similar. You can collect revenue. It adds value to your organization, especially if you have a stackable framework or you have other certifications that could come back to you, and you have them in the purchase cycle, perhaps. And then the quality and validity, you own that of the practice items or the e-content or the diagnostic test. You're the authority around it. Whereas if you go a third party, there's the quality, the validity of it, there's the qualification. So those things, who are you going to qualify as an exam prep provider? And then there's a revenue in that too. Is like they have to pay to play in terms of becoming a person who can provide that services, the exam preparation services. So that's another revenue source there. There's setup fees. There's people who have to manage it in your organization. When I was at GBCI, we had the whole education department deal with that, and they did make money, and they had third party too, so you could do a hybrid, that you have your own education and exam preparation, and you could third party that as well. So there's a lot of ways you could set that up, and we would be willing to help you with that. So the next area is the frame paper certifications. ASAE has a lot, and this is the mechanics really group, the automotive service excellent organization that has, I think, about 20, 30 certificates or certifications, and they charge for all sorts of specialties essentially for each certificate, and they have to be updated. So their price point is low, but they have a lot of volume, so they can make a lot of money out of it. Now you have fancier things like what the Board of Pharmacy specialties have, and they have it on their online store where you can get it. So it's where I shared with you the paper, the desk weight that they had earlier. But they're a lot higher in price. So, and I think they do third party, but they get a piece of the revenue, and they don't have to maintain the website. They don't really have to do a lot in that sense of it, but they have to do setup and things like that. So again, the pros and cons: you getting revenue, you're getting value. If you own the frame certificates or certifications, then, or paper certifications, you are the primary authority. You could also do digital badging and things like that and charge for that. Some groups just integrate that into their the price of those certifications. Some groups, which is less typical, divide that up for digital badging. But the cons, again, are setup, labor. If you're doing third party, then you have less control over the quality and things like that. And then, sometimes when I worked at GBCI, there were sometimes the printer had issues and things like that, and finding the right printer when those issues happen. Let's say the printer breaks, now people can't get it. So there's always those breakdowns that happen when things are still working mechanically like that. So the next area is really your content, essentially. So what can you sell content-wise? And this could also work within your integrated marketing, with your content marketing piece of things. So ATD has a learning system. PMI has the BOK, the PMBOK. CSI has their standards. Change management also has their standards. Then the crane operators have their reports and books, and SHRM has their templates. They all have more than that, but those are some things that stand out. SHRM has a lot of attention because they have these great HR templates, and I don't think anyone's really come close to competing with them on their templates that you pay for, or some of them you download if you're a member. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but they do collect revenue on these things. So these are some things to keep in mind. Some of it crosses over to association management, things like that, how you make money as an association or just a business in general. But these are ways that you could add to your revenue stream. and obviously that's a pro. And then it does add a lot of value when you look at these reports like NCCA in our industry, or I should say ICE in our industry, and ATP and CNG. They make things available in our industry that's very valuable to read and to look at, besides the evidence-based things that happen. And some groups actually have the online stores, online bookstores, and things like that. I believe ATD has an online bookstore, if I'm not mistaken. And then, you have control of the quality if you're the publisher itself and the editor of this, and you can make it valid as well, and you're the primary authority. So there's some really great things that happen there. The cons, again, is maintaining it, putting these things together are difficult. There can be contentious getting folks to agree on if you have co-authorships and things like that, the committees and things like that, or the editors to agree that this is an important topic and this author should be included. There's maintenance of putting these things up there on a website and collecting the money and getting that through all the necessary approvals, technology, and payment processes and things like that in your organization. I always tell the story when I soft launched a gamified credential at GBCI, the Green Classroom Professional, and we soft launched it. Everything went well, except we couldn't collect payment because I thought that I thought that the technology group and the payment processing group, or the accounts payable group, were talking to each other, the accounting group, and they were not talking to each other, even though we had that conversation a month ago or something like that. So, these things have their little hiccups as any other product would. And then, of course, it costs money to do things like this. So, but it is, again, a revenue stream, and as your standards and reports, you're one of the sole source authorities around this, and experts in this world. So people do look up to these type of organizations to provide them with key information and documents. The other thing is sponsorship. So my understanding is that the Animal Welfare Advancement, this association, what they do is they try to raise revenue to have people sit for their certification or their training content or anything like that. So again, this is a different way of collecting money from individuals or organizations out there that are willing to sponsor. I was a graduate of social therapy, and it was ran by the Eastside Institute for Short-Term Therapy. And when I was becoming a social therapist, they allowed me to be an intern for 2 years for free, essentially. And years later, when I started my own company, I had enough money so I could donate to somebody else going through that program. And so it's a really nice way to give back to the community, or something that was really important to folks, and there's a connection to that. So, there's a part of it is a sponsorship and a donation kind of model that you could think about, but it's another way to think about increasing your revenues that way, and always bring in that social giving aspects of things if you can. Again, there's revenue, there's value, there's that social giving piece of it. There's you're the primary authority for the sponsorships. Again, getting this set up on the maintenance costs. Again, it's another product service that you're putting out there. The sponsorships, you probably have to qualify, but it's not as a big deal. You don't want to receive money from that might have a conflict of interest or an unethical source. And then labor, and then expectations of the sponsorship, because they might expect things in return. Those that are sponsoring an individual, it could be a company that says we want to sponsor 50 folks. It could be a person, and in return they would get maybe an advertisement somewhere or a shout out or things like that. And universities are so good at getting that. They have a whole department that deals with this type of work, and some large organizations do as well. But I haven't seen anything in credentialing that have that. Maybe PMI does it, but I'm not sure. Then you have events, which is typically your conference. And sometimes you could do events at the local level. Some groups like PMI have their chapters for their PMPs and other cert holders. There's a client that I had that talked about that they have a party at some point. They collect money and they use those revenues to help their organization grow, and getting more volume in their certification offerings. But there's a lot that you could do with events. People are open to, donating some money and things like that. So to raise that money. So and that could all go back to your volumes and your bottom line. Again, this is less common, the events, and how much goes back to the certification organization. But it's, there's revenue around it. There's value for experts coming together. Whenever we run expert facilitated groups, they love coming together and just learning from each other. Sometimes they don't even want to charge you for the travel expenses or any expenses. They just want to be there to give back, and they want to learn from each other, and they have so much fun doing that for the most part. So, the setup and the maintenance, again, there's labor, and then events could be held by third-party organizations. So, there will be a revenue share, and are you getting what you need to get? And then you have to maintain that quality and your brand and the validity of that piece of it too. So the one thing I didn't have on that initial screen when I was going to go over all those areas was the in-house expertise and essentially access to SMEs. Now, I put these two groups on here because one is in the medical world, and I started there, and they have a lot of specialty groups that they provide psychometric and exam development and testing services, and the other one's in the eye professional world, and they also do this for other organizations. So, if you have in-house expertise, SMEs, why not use them to do other services for you? And you could actually end up hiring them as a contractor, or sometimes they could volunteer, and they could be helpful. But it's not only limited to psychometric and exam development services. They could also help you with other things, such as creating your content, becoming spokespersons. You could create like a whole speakers bureau. So those are some things that you have access to these SMEs, and that's just a gold mine in my sense. And they love to volunteer to help your organization. And I love helping, our organizations in our industry. I get excited when CNG asks me to speak, or some other group, or some industry folks. BTL had me talk to them and things like that. So it's just great to have that experience as an SME as well, because it's a mutually beneficial to both groups, I think. Again, there's potential revenue, value, and the quality that you could build in, value to your credential holders, and SMEs as well, and your organization. You're using your organization to build your brand too there, and you're the primary authority, which is great. Again, the cons is really the setup, and then the setup piece has also, are you qualified to do this? And that's a question you need to ask. Maybe you have to bring on some other resources, and maybe it's not cost effective anymore. But it is a potential revenue stream there. The other things that you could think about is, and this is not an exhaustive list that I'm giving you today, but there's job boards or job matching for a fee that you could do. You have access to all these credential holders. A lot of you have a public directory, but if that could be at a basic level that anyone can access, but you might get permission from your credential holder and job seekers, and they could go on a job board and create a whole fee around that. Another suggestion that came in, I think last week when I was talking to someone, is credit cards. You could set up a credit card system in your association, and I think some of you do that, but again, it's a little revenue there. So those are some suggestions and some ways that we think you could make money. What we like to do is open up this conversation, and if there's anything we could help you with in terms of helping you build your ways to make money on your end, let us know, and I'll show you how you could contact us in a second. But I want to open this up in terms of how you all think, or there's any other suggestions, so I could put a list together of how we could, how you think you can, other ways to make money for other organizations in your field, in credentialing world, certification world. And if you want to put that on the chat box, that'd be great as well. Let me know. I'm going to pause here. So I'm also going to open this up to the chat box if anybody has any suggestions. I'll give you 1 or 2 minutes here. All right, we have a few comments. Someone said, what about working with partner organizations? That's great. Approved provider programs, that's also possible. There's different revenue shares you could do with different groups. When we created the Green Classroom Professional, we were trying to create a revenue share with the teachers' unions. Obviously, that was a conflict of interest, but we tried to work with any group we could at that time. There's a question on how you can speak more about sponsorships and maintain impartiality with accreditation. I think that's a tricky one. Mitigating impartiality with 17024 has to do with your, and I'm an ANSI assessor, so has to do with how you use your policies and procedures and things like that, and how you mitigate it. The standard doesn't say that there's anything that says you have to eliminate it. It says you have to minimize it and or eliminate it. So if you have policies and procedures, conflict of interest agreements and NDAs and things like that, you could do that with your sponsorships. I don't know which of these are most lucrative. From my little knowledge, that was another question, which of these tend to be most lucrative starting out. I don't really know. I think exam prep might be one where there's a few more and more clients coming to us to say, hey, we want to create an exam, but we also want to create practice items or a practice exam. Can you do that? And obviously we can. So I think that's one where you could say, hey, we could do it very quickly because you're going to deliver the exams. Particularly our clients that are not huge, they tend to deliver on their LMS systems, learning management systems or online systems, and sometimes they're survey systems, the practice exams or both exams. So, somebody made a really good point about event sponsoring can be also for webcasts, so it doesn't have to be a physical thing. The next question, what about having your certification be used for college credit? Is there revenue there? I think processing it, there could be revenue there. that's one of those things that you have to sort of judge. That's possible. I don't personally know that. I know when I was at GBCI, we were talking about it. There might be someone who's more qualified to answer that question than myself, but I would imagine there's an administrative fee if you do that, um, and and getting college credit is one of those things that can be a little interesting on many ways. Because I put a course together many years ago and I wanted to get college credit for it, and there's different loopholes for different states and different organizations and states and schools. Um, just looking through the questions here still. So yeah, online exam prep is very lucrative, especially if you have volumes, but have to be careful if it doesn't jeopardize accreditation. So that's true. Both NCCA and ANSI have that separation between training and assessment. There's a good reason for it, so just think about that. Yes, that's true that there are groups that can't do exam prep because they need that wall between them. Um, there are, if you could prove that you can mitigate it, then sometimes it does work through policies and procedures and things like that. So, and sometimes it's just organizational differences getting to 501c3s or 501c6s. I know that's a hassle, but some groups have done that. Like GBCI did that with USGBC had the exam prep piece, and GBCI had the certification piece of it. So, so that's a, a very good point. Yes, membership is more, we consider that more of a traditional fee structure. So it can increase revenue and retention. So you can have organizations join your group as a membership and then they get a discount. You got to remember, is that an unfair advantage to them? And that's what the accreditation standards sort of profess. So the questions are coming in not through necessarily a chat box, so but I could send them to all. Hold on a second. Oh no, it's only the answers I could send. But I'm reading them out, so if you need me to repeat them, just let me know. Assessment-based certificates are, okay, we already went through that. Assessment-based certificates are also lucrative. That's true. There's certificates, if you make them very small, which some folks, I think if you make them small in terms of the number of items, and you still want them to be valid, they can be very lucrative in that sense of it. Any other questions? We had a lot of questions on this one. Okay, so there's another question here. With some of these options, is there feedback that the credential holder feels like they're being nickeled and dimed by having to pay for every little thing? That's a really good question. I think you would have to probably have a marketing or pricing or some sort of committee to really investigate your audience to see if that's the case. If they think that they're contributing, like the sponsorships where they're contributing back and they're not being really forced to do that, that's one thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm being nickeled and dimed when I go to the grocery store these days, because every time I pay by credit card, there's like, would you like to donate $1 to this sort of thing? But then at the same time, it's nice to donate $1. So it's really a choice. So I think if you give them a choice, then that's really a great sort of thing to do. But it doesn't hurt to have focus groups around this and maybe talk about that as some things we could look at where where your sentiments are in terms of that type of your we call it in marketing, we call that psychographics. So where your psychographics stand. We used to do a lot of marketing research on that when I was at one point in my career. I was a marketing researcher, so for a pharmaceutical marketing agency. So these days that's not a great thing to say, pharmaceuticals, around that. Any other questions at this point? So any other suggestions? There were a few suggestions on here that were really great. So, like assessment-based certificates, some of the thing, bringing in membership, that's really a good thing. There's some concerns like ANSI, with online preparation or accreditation, essentially. I shouldn't say just ANSI. And there's a piece of it, approved providers. I didn't emphasize this probably enough, but if you're doing exam preparation, you could create the approved provider guidelines and charge them a fee around that. So these are some ways that you could all try to make money, and hopefully you'll think about it, and maybe you'll come back to us one day and say, what, I tried this and it worked, or it didn't work. Hopefully it will all work, and things like that. But we'd like to, if you have any thoughts or ideas, we'd like to hear them, and so we could compile a larger list as we move through the next decade. So actually, what's coming up is November 9th, 2019, and November 20th, 2019, not 2020. But those are two speaking engagements where I'll be speaking on maximizing your job analysis, and that is really looking at, well, what are a lot of clients of mine come to me and say, we don't really like the traditional job analysis, and there's options and opportunities, and essentially it's really bringing in some of the competency modeling that we do for a position or a really specific job that folks are looking at, and we'll get into that at that meeting. And then we're going to talk about an aptitude test on cybersecurity the next day at the cybersecurity conference, and then we have some things on stackable credentials next year, and then we're actually coming out with our own credentialing quality standards that's going to be priced a little lower than ANSI and NCCA. It's also going to be prescriptive. The standards are question-based, so every standard clause is a question. And then the other piece of it is that it's not as comprehensive as NCCA and ANSI, the 17024 or 2659 standard. It's really trying to get at what we think is critical. So Liberty Munson and I wrote this, and then it was reviewed by I think Todd and Jennifer Naughton, Todd Philbrick and Jennifer Naughton. So we really spent a lot of time thinking about what's very practical in getting what's the most critical around credentialing quality standards, and being prescriptive was really the piece of it. So if you're really interested in that, let us know, and definitely register for it. But we are looking for 2 or 3 more pilot candidates, which lets you go through the process for free in the first year. So let us know. ICA is the International Council on Accreditation, so we teamed up with them, but Liberty and I wrote the standards, and we own the standard itself. They're just managing it. The job analysis for the workforce is a competency model that really connects to the one that I'm presenting next week on. But if you want to register and figure out how to take elements of a competency model and use it in your job analysis, that's what that's all about. And then a lot of our clients really, and I don't blame them, they get fussy about pass rates. And it's really tough to live with your pass rates at time, but there are things you could do that you could select and readjust or adjust your pass rates if you're doing it in a valid way. And we'll talk to you about that on that date. So if you want to reach out and talk to me about anything that you might see of interest or have further questions or need any help with our services, you could go to our website /consultation and have a quick consult with me, and we'll see if we could look at your situation and provide solutions for it. And I don't know if there's any further questions. I'm looking at the list here if there's anything. There was one last question. Oh no, we covered them all. So with that, I don't know if there's any further questions, but I'll give you a minute or two. Hopefully this was helpful, and we're giving back so that you could all make some revenue. Okay, I don't see any questions at this point, so I want to thank you for joining me on this webinar and look forward to hearing any of your feedback. Anyway, you could email me and would love to hear any more suggestions you may have. A lot of this came from a lot of folks in the field that had these suggestions. I didn't even think of a lot of these things. I just asked a lot of people in the field. So I'm still building up a list, and hopefully we'll have that list available at some point.